Have you ever heard of Medusa? The snake-haired Greek monster who turns people to stone with a single glance? Well, she may just be a myth, but there is an area so deadly that it could actually turn you to stone. The infamous Lake Natron. What makes Lake Natron's water so dangerous? What kind of creatures live there? And could you survive if you fell in? This is What If, and here's what would happen if you jumped into Lake Natron. Before we take the plunge, we'd better look at what Lake Natron is made of. Much like the Dead Sea, this Tanzanian lake doesn't run off into any oceans or rivers. This allows it to soak up all that salty desert rain. Soupy. Yet, what makes it especially lethal is its close proximity to the active volcano Oldoinho Lengai. The volcano spews a rare kind of lava, rich in sodium and potassium carbonate, called natrocarbonatite, or natron for short. Releasing into the water, this mix of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate were key ingredients once used in Egyptian mummification, creating the perfect preservative in lake form. The whole chemical composition is extremely alkaline, with pH levels of 10.5, close to that of ammonia. This gives the lake its rosy hue. Any birds who happen to take a dive and don't make it out become calcified in a hardened stone-like husk. Ugh, talk about killing two birds with one stone. In 2013, wildlife photographer Nick Brandt was one of the first to document this phenomenon. He discovered several stone birds and other unlucky animals in the dry season when the water had receded. He theorized that since the lake is so mirror-like and reflective, the birds must have flown right into it, as if it was a big glass door. But despite so many birds dying in Lake Natron, there is a particular species flourishing. Turns out, the lake's toxic waters provide a safe haven from predators, making it perfect flamingo flocking grounds. So, if flamingos can handle it, couldn't we? Well, it's not that simple, unfortunately. Flamingos thrive in salty lakes because of their tough skin and scaly legs, which prevent burns. They can drink the fresh water from nearby springs or geysers at the edges of the lake, and if they're desperate enough, they can even filter salt water with special glands in their nasal cavities. And to top it all off, their strong stomachs allow them to feed on the toxic algae found throughout the lake. This makes Lake Natron the perfect spot to raise and protect their young. So let's say we tried to live like a flamingo and decided to take a dip. Well, depending on the time of year, the water can be up to 60 degrees, which is hot enough to cause third-degree burns in 5 seconds or less. Also, I wouldn't plan on doing any fancy dives or cannonballs, as its shallowness is also chock full of sharp, salty structures. You wouldn't be turned to stone instantly, but if you happen to drown and stay submerged, your entire body would harden and be preserved. If people found you hundreds of years later, you might still have your hair and organs intact. Yeah, still looking spiffy after all those years. Like mummification, natron's super high alkalinity stops the decomposition process. Thankfully, this means you'd be safe from vultures or any other hungry scavengers looking for a snack. If you waded into the lake at a time when the water temperature was lower, it could feel more like a hot tub. But your eyes or any open wounds would sting like crazy because of all that salt. I'd strap on some goggles if I were you. In 2007, another bird flew straight into this chemical cocktail. A group of wildlife videographers plunged into Lake Natron's toxicity when their helicopter crashed. The pilot suffered a broken leg and another passenger had a broken hip. Incredibly, one of the passengers managed to struggle to shore and alerted some of the Maasai tribespeople nearby. They quickly built stretchers and carried the injured to land in the nick of time. Even though you could survive Lake Natron's waters, I'd stick to a swimming pool if I were you. You know, videos about falling into things very popular on What If. You may have seen what if you fell into the world's deepest hole? What if you fell into a pool full of piranhas? What if you fell into a pit of snakes? Of course, there was Lake Natron. We've got some more deadly lakes coming up for you later on in this marathon. But first, what I want to say to you is Oldoño Lengai. You may recall that's the name of the volcano in Tanzania that feeds the natural carbonatite into Lake Natron. So it's goggles and wetsuits if you want to go swimming in Lake Natron, but what if you went to Antarctica? Well, it'd be parkas and boots, obviously, but have you ever thought about what's underneath Antarctica? It's not just ice floating in the middle of the ocean. There is land underneath there, and it's not always hospitable. Deep beneath the thick layer of million-year-old ice, something is lurking quietly, waiting to rip through the rigid ice sheets. No, not that. This enormous icy wasteland is sitting on top of a volcanic ridge. And in our hypothetical world, these volcanoes are about to wake up. Could their scorching lava wipe out the surface of Earth? Or would the thick Antarctic ice stop the lava before it makes our planet uninhabitable? This is What If, and here's what would happen if Antarctica's dormant volcanoes woke up. Antarctica is the coldest continent on Earth, and it's quite mysterious. We didn't know it had active volcanoes buried underneath it until 2013. When scientists accidentally detected 2 clusters of small earthquakes. Now that we've scanned Antarctica with ice-penetrating radar, we know that there are many more volcanoes hiding below the ice. 138 to be precise. But that's only the ones we know of. How many more could be hibernating there? And how much trouble would we be in if all those volcanoes suddenly decided their slumber was over? It shouldn't be too surprising that these ash-breathing ruptures have been buried underneath Antarctica's ice shield this whole time. After all, volcanoes are easy to come by, even outside our home planet. There are volcanoes on Jupiter's moon Io, Saturn's moon Enceladus, and on our planetary neighbor Venus. But let's not waste our time there. We've got our own world to save. Do you know what happens when a volcano erupts? There are usually warning signs before the real action begins, like the waves of earthquakes. They indicate that there's molten rock moving beneath the surface. Then, lava and ash join the party, accompanied by heated gases. It depends on a variety of scenarios and the kind of lava involved, but on average, lava moves at about 10 kilometers per hour, pretty easy to outrun. But when a major eruption occurs, a volcano releases superheated gases and ash. Combined, they create something called a pyroclastic cloud. These things are hot, reaching up to 700 degrees, and they can move at 80 kilometers per hour. Being trapped by one of these would mean the end of days for you. But Antarctica's volcanoes are a different story. They're buried under layers of ice that are more than 4 kilometers thick in places. We wouldn't be dealing with volcanic gases making their way to the surface, at least as far as one eruption goes. The heat released would melt massive caverns in the ice, creating substantial amounts of meltwater. And that's when things would start getting ugly. the newly created meltwater would cause the ice above it to move more rapidly. The Antarctic ice cover would begin heading into the ocean. From there, the domino effect would kick in. The huge weight of the ice puts all that pressure on volcanoes, keeping them stable. But decrease that pressure, and a volcano gets limbered up, and magma finds a way out through an eruption. In the case of Antarctica, multiple volcanic eruptions could wake up over 100 other volcanoes and destabilize the entire region. As the volcanoes continued to blow their tops, more meltwater would be created, causing more of the Antarctic ice to slide into the ocean. Antarctic ice would be enclosed by warmer ocean currents. On one hand, we'd get a new look at Antarctic bedrock that's been hiding under the ice this whole time. On the other hand, the ice wouldn't just disappear into thin air, it would melt. And if all of Antarctica's ice melted, it would raise the global sea level by about 60 meters. Rising sea levels could contribute to major storms moving slower and dropping more rain. Hurricanes and typhoons would wreak havoc on the Earth's surface. Wildlife along coastal areas would lose their habitats, and agricultural soil would become contaminated with salt. Extensive flooding would push millions of people away from the coastline. If the eruptions happened in the span of one day, we'd be looking at thousands of deaths and storms wiping out everything floating in the oceans. But let's go back to Antarctica for a second. Now that all the ice has melted, what about the rampaging magma? The good news is it wouldn't turn the Earth into a lava world. After all, the eruptions would occur underwater. The hot magma would solidify in the cold water of the Antarctic Ocean and maybe add more real estate to Antarctica's own bedrock. But things don't end there. When volcanoes erupt on land, they spew out heated gases, including carbon monoxide, methane, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen. To go along with this, there's usually some water vapor thrown into the mix. By some estimates, volcanoes are responsible for the release of 645 million tons of carbon dioxide every year. If the Antarctic volcano eruptions turned out to be powerful enough, they would blow open huge expanses of ice, allowing the release of even more toxic greenhouse gases. When one of Antarctica's surface volcanoes, Mount Takahe, erupted some 18,000 years ago, it spewed out the chemicals that ate a hole in the ozone layer. That hole warmed up the southern hemisphere and caused glaciers to melt. It helped wrap up the last ice age. If you traveled to the deepest points of Earth, what would you find? Lost cities? Mythical sea monsters? Rivers of gold? Probably not, but there's still a lot to discover, so join me as we travel deep underneath the surface to explore some of the most inhospitable places on Earth. What lives at the bottom of the Mariana Trench? How much of the ocean is unmapped? And what is mined deep below the Earth's surface? This is What If, and here's what would happen if you explored the deepest points on Earth. Not many people can claim that they've been to the deepest points on Earth, but Victor Vescovo can. From 2018 to 2019, Vescovo led an expedition that visited the deepest points in all 5 oceans. The 5 Deeps expedition covered 87,000 kilometers in just 10 months and completed 39 dives using a small submarine. For your trip, you're only going to visit one trench, the Mariana Trench. You'll need to save about $750,000 for the trip, but you'd be one of the few people to explore this deep. What would you see as you descend? First, you'd need to travel to Japan. From there, you'd take a submarine about 2,000 kilometers out into the Pacific Ocean. Challenger Deep, the deepest point of the Mariana Trench, is almost 11 kilometers below the surface, and it would take about 2.5 hours to reach it. There will be a lot to look at in the beginning of your descent. The first 200 meters below the surface is where most ocean life thrives. As you travel deeper, it becomes darker and the less wildlife you'd see, though you'd still get to witness the occasional whale diving for food. You'd see your first deep-sea creature, the fangtooth, at 1 kilometer below the surface. This appropriately named fish is 16 centimeters long with 2 giant teeth. To make room for them, the fangtooth has 2 sockets beside its brain. As you travel deeper than 2,500 meters, there are no more whales. They don't usually dive down this deep. But when you hit 8,000 meters, you'd encounter the Mariana snailfish. At this point, the atmospheric pressure is nearly 1,100 times what you feel at sea level. If you weren't inside a pressurized submarine, it would be like having the weight of a fully loaded truck on your head. Those little snailfish out there must be pretty strong to withstand all this intense pressure. Eventually, you'd reach the very bottom, the Challenger Deep. If you look closely, you might spot an amphipod species, Hirondellea gigas. These small, deep ocean creatures are only about 3 centimeters long. And that's about it down in the Mariana Trench. No secret treasures, hidden cities, or sea monsters. Next, it's time for you to travel to the world's deepest sea volcano, the West Mata volcano. This underwater site is located southwest of the Samoas. You'll need to rent another submarine to travel down 1,200 meters below the surface. But since you just visited the Mariana Trench, it should be no problem for you. If you're lucky, the volcano would be active and you would enjoy seeing lava fountains and glowing bubbles. Just be careful of all the debris that erupts into the ocean. Both the West Mata volcano and the Mariana Trench are natural deep points on Earth. But what about something that's man-made? The Mponeng gold mine is the deepest operating mine in the world. Around 4,000 miners work in it every day. And despite safety precautions, it's still risky. In March 2020, a seismic event killed 3 miners who were 3.5 kilometers below the surface. To get to the mine, you'd need to travel to the Gauteng province in South Africa. You'd take the elevator, known as a cage, with 119 other workers until it reaches 2.5 kilometers below the Earth's surface. As the elevator doors open, you'll notice the heat. It's about 30 degrees. And that's only because the mining company has created a system to cool down the air. Without fans blowing over a mixture of ice and salt, the mine would be a whopping 60 degrees. Why? Because you're so deep in the earth that its inner heat is warming up the surrounding atmosphere. You'd only be 2.5 kilometers underneath the Earth's surface. To go lower, you'd need to walk or drive the rest of the way. You'd be at the bottom of the mine when you reached 4 kilometers. That's as deep as 10 Empire State Buildings. Luckily, there are no cave creatures to worry about down here. The only life down here, other than the miners, is monotypic bacteria. While the Mponeng gold mine is impressive, all of the deepest points on Earth are in oceans. According to NASA, over 80% of the oceans remain unmapped, unobserved, and unexplored. And if we want to continue to explore these areas, we're going to need to take better care of our planet. They're not the biggest falls in the world, not by a long shot, but they're certainly among the most famous. Niagara Falls attracts millions of visitors from around the world every year. People come for the history. They come for the romance. They come for the spectacular view. But some people just can't get close enough. This is What If, and here's what would happen if you fell into Niagara Falls. There are 3 different waterfalls that make up Niagara Falls, but the one that gets all the attention is the Canadian Horseshoe Falls. The Canadian Horseshoe Falls is about 57 meters tall and 670 meters wide. Water rushes over its edge at a peak speed of 109 kilometers per hour, dumping about 2.8 million liters of water over its edge every second. Considering its height, its speed, and its raw natural power, it's hard to believe that anyone could survive a trip over the falls. And yet, it's been done several times. Was it skill? Or was it luck? How do you survive a fall into Niagara Falls? The first person to survive a trip over Niagara Falls was Annie Edson Taylor. In 1921, on her 63rd birthday, she crawled into an oak and iron barrel and floated right over the edge of the falls. Taylor performed this stunt for money and fame, but she didn't earn much for her feat. Nonetheless, daredevils seeking to follow in her footsteps were not deterred. In 1928, for example, Jean Lussier went over Niagara Falls in a 182-centimeter rubber and steel ball lined with 32 inner tubes. Lussier survived the fall and spent the rest of his life selling souvenirs to tourists. Not all the daredevils were as lucky as Taylor and Lussier. In fact, of the 16 people who've tried to beat the falls, just a little more than half have lived to tell the tale. To date, only 5 people have survived an unprotected fall down the Canadian Horseshoe Falls. The first and youngest was Roger Woodward in 1960. He was only 7 years old at the time when a boating accident caused him to be swept overboard and over the edge of the falls. Woodward was rescued shortly after and made a full recovery after spending just 3 days in the hospital being treated for a concussion. Today, that event is still referred to as the Miracle at Niagara. Most rescuers and experts at Niagara consider unprotected survival stories to be blind luck. But there are some strategies that might just save your life if, for any reason, you find yourself hurtling 109 kilometers per hour in freezing cold water towards the edge of a 57-meter drop. The first thing you need to remember just before you go over is to take a really deep breath. When you reach the bottom, there will be so much water swirling around you, not to mention the intense pressure of the water falling from above that you could easily suffocate. So, taking a big gulp of air before your fall could buy you some time. You'll also want to take precautions to protect your head. If you can, orient yourself so that you fall feet first. Then, you'll want to wrap your arms around your head with your elbows over your nose and clench your eyes and mouth shut as tightly as possible. In fact, you should tense up all your muscles and bring your legs together before impact, making your body as watertight as possible. You're already incredibly lucky if you survive the fall, but that doesn't mean your ordeal is over. The water temperature below the falls is around the freezing mark, which gives you about 15 minutes to get out of there before hypothermia kicks in. You'll likely be badly bruised and terribly disoriented, but if you can stay calm and focused, you might just be one of the lucky few to survive a fall into Niagara Falls. Of course, the best way to survive is to pay attention to the warning signs and respect the safety rails. After all, the falls are huge. Do you really need to risk your life to get a closer look? All that stands between you and a pool of boiling, rotten egg-smelling, acidic water is a humble boardwalk and your good judgment.
Stray off the path, and you could be headed toward quite the swim. Heads up, scorching temperatures would be just the start of your problems. How long could you survive your accidental dip? How would it feel to swallow these colorful waters? And why might there not be anything left of you to save? This is What If, and here's what would happen if you fell into a Yellowstone hot spring. Yellowstone National Park is one of the most iconic in the United States, and it's situated atop a volcanic hotspot. If you decided to take an off-trail hike, you could accidentally walk right into Emerald Spring. This hot spring is located in the Norris Geyser Basin, and it looks spectacular. Except you'd notice that the visuals don't make up for the stench. Ugh. Yeah, you'd catch a whiff of what smells like rotten eggs. That's the result of sulfur-eating microorganisms that create sulfuric acid. The acid evaporates and turns into hydrogen sulfide gas, which gives off a putrid aroma. Oh. Get a little closer and you'll be able to feel that the green waters are hot. Sizzling hot. There's no way you'd even want to stick a toe in them. But that might not be up to you. As you approached the dazzling but stinky hot spring, the ground around it would seem solid. And then you hear a crack. The ground at your feet gave way to your body weight. You were standing on a delicate crust formed by underground minerals dissolved by the water and then redeposited on the surface of the spring. All of this made the crust as thin and fragile as a sheet of ice. Your whole body would be completely submerged. You'd now understand why the word hot in hot springs is not an understatement. The blazing temperatures, hitting 82 degrees Celsius in places, would send a sharp pain through your skin. That's dangerously close to water's boiling point. For context, temperatures of 50 degrees Celsius can give you third-degree burns in 5 minutes. If you fell into Emerald Spring, chances are you'd be dead in 3 minutes or less. Now, before things get really nasty, you could try to push through the pain and pull yourself out of this mess. But even then, the outcome wouldn't be pretty. You would end up in a hospital in critical condition, clinging to your life. But if you didn't make it out in time, you'd begin to boil from the inside out. And this would be just the agonizing start of your very unavoidable demise. You see, hydrothermal vents help turn Emerald Spring into a potent acid bath by perpetually infusing it with chemical microbes. On top of that, microorganisms compound the problem by breaking off pieces of the surrounding rock and adding sulfuric acid to the pool. All that makes falling into Emerald Spring the near equivalent of dousing yourself with hydrochloric acid. When Emerald Spring's water touched your skin, it would cause your tissue to swell and bubble. If it wasn't for your gurgling, you'd be able to feel the popping of your exploding blood vessels. You'd start to bleed out. The fat under your skin would also begin to bubble, and with all that screaming, you'd swallow more and more liquid acid that would burn through your stomach and destroy your internal organs. If your lifeless body wasn't pulled out in time, all that would remain of you would be a thick coat of blood, fat, and tissue floating on the top of the emerald green water. After a 23-year-old man fell into a hot spring in the Norris Geyser Basin, authorities had to delay retrieving his body due to a thunderstorm. The next day, nothing of the unfortunate visitor's body remained. Urban legend has it that all the authorities found were his wallet and flip-flops. Sadly, he's just one of 22 people known to have died from hot spring-related injuries in and around Yellowstone since 1890. In a best-case scenario, you would end up in critical care battling third-degree burns. Worst case, you're dissolved into a fizzy goo. So follow the park rules and don't wander off the designated paths.
Hey, hot enough for you? Yeah, I hate when people ask me that too, it's so banal. But in actual fact, it has been hot enough for me. People in regions all over the world, including mine, have been suffering through some pretty intense heat waves lately. I'm not gonna lie, it's been pretty uncomfortable, not to mention pretty stinky, if you know what I mean. But what if you lived in the hottest place on Earth all the time, year round? 40 degrees Celsius, 100 plus Fahrenheit heats every day. Well, there are people who do it. Have a look.
Ever wonder what it would feel like to step into an oven? Welcome to Death Valley, California. Temperatures here can climb to a scorching 54 degrees Celsius, which is as cozy as the internal temperature of a steak. In Death Valley, it's so hot you could fry an egg without a stove. But how soon would you get fried yourself? What would your days in the hottest place on the planet be like? What could you do to survive this intense heat? And what could happen to your body if you weren't careful? This is What If, and here's what would happen if you lived in the hottest place on Earth. It's so hot you can barely breathe. This national park that stretches across California and Nevada might as well be hell on Earth. Located 86 meters below sea level, it's the lowest point in North America. And the surrounding mountains trap the superheated air like an oven. For 5 months of the year, temperatures hover around 48 degrees. You'd think that life there would be unsustainable, but it turns out that Death Valley isn't always dead. It comes to life in the spring as colorful wildflowers bloom and the temporary lakes fill the lowlands. And besides the tourists visiting the park, around 500 people live there all the time. So pack your bags, you're moving to the scorching hot desert to join them. Life in Death Valley would be very different from anything you may be used to. Not just because of the heat, but because it's quite a commute to, well, anywhere. The nearest high school and shopping center is an hour away. It's a 2-hour drive to the closest major city, and there are no doctors, dentists, or restaurants around. Despite this, or because of this, there's a tight community in Death Valley. In the Cow Creek complex, residents of its 80 units share a gym, a playground, and a library. And since they don't get many visitors during the hottest times of the year, they end up spending a lot of time together. Though there isn't much of an entertainment scene in Death Valley, there's a lot to see outdoors. I mean, after all, we're talking about a national park. You could listen to the tiny pops and pings of billions of salt crystals bursting apart in the heat. Maybe enjoy the view of the colored hills thanks to the oxidation of natural metal deposits in the mountains. You could swim in a water-filled cavern, and if you're lucky, you could even catch a devil's hole pupfish, a rare fish that can withstand the hot water. Life in Death Valley doesn't sound so bad, except for that. It would take some adjusting to the heat. When our body temperature reaches 41.7 degrees, it can become life-threatening. This is known as hyperthermia, and it can lead to deterioration of internal organs and eventually death. In the climate extremes of your new home, you could easily heat up to the point of hyperthermia. Your best bet would be to take it slow. First, don't forget the sunglasses, as the salt-covered basin can be blinding under the sunlight. Make sure you always have sunscreen and protective clothing, and avoid staying outside in the warmer hours, usually from 4 to 5:30 p.m. If you don't want to die of hyperthermia, you should prepare before you even set foot in the desert. Your ability to survive in a hot climate is largely determined by your body shape and size. That's because heat is a byproduct of cell metabolism. So, larger animals with larger bodies and more cells typically produce more heat. Dropping a few kilos or pounds might be a good idea to adjust faster. Most people adapt to the heat after a few weeks, but it could take you a full year to get fully adjusted. At this point, you'd have a lower core temperature and your blood vessels would increase blood flow to your skin. You'd also start sweating more. Not that this should be a problem. And once you start wearing a sweater at 27 degrees, you'd know you're officially acclimated. Feel like upping the stakes of your late-night skinny dips? Well, welcome to Lake Nyos, one of the most dangerous lakes on the planet. Here, your cannonball might just take thousands of lives. What makes Lake Nyos so deadly? How much damage could it cause? And how bad a splash will you make by falling in it? This is What If, and here's what would happen if you fell into Lake Nyos. In the northwest region of Cameroon, Africa, over a volcanic crater lies Lake Nyos, a small lake with depths of about 210 meters. Crater lakes like Nyos tend to release carbon dioxide due to volcanic activity deep below. Usually, this carbon dioxide dissipates slowly as the lake naturally shifts. But if the lake stays still enough, the gas dissolves into the water and continues accumulating there, steadily turning it into a ticking time bomb. So, what would happen if that water were suddenly disturbed? Nyos is one of only 3 lakes known to accumulate deadly levels of carbon dioxide. Agitating this kind of lake could cause something called a limnic eruption. But hold on, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. You'd have a front row seat to this catastrophe, and without even knowing it, you'd be the trigger of a major disaster. As your body sank into the deadly waters of Lake Nyos, the dissolved carbon dioxide would rise to the surface. The lake would start to bubble, and these bubbles would cause even more turbulence. Have you seen the famous Diet Coke and Mentos eruption? Yeah, that would be you. A 90-meter water jet would explode into the sky, sending you flying as high as Big Ben in London. We'll say you're lucky enough to survive the drop, but you'd still have all the carbon dioxide to deal with. In 20 seconds, all of the accumulated gas would be unleashed in a cloud over 1 kilometer wide. It would spread as far as 25 kilometers away from the lake, and it would travel at a speed of up to 48 kilometers per hour, silently choking most of the living creatures in its path. If you were in a village nearby, instead of soaking in Lake Nyos, you'd hear a strange rumbling sound, followed by the sight of a white mist rising from the lake. The deadly gas cloud would then usher in a gust of wind, putting out any fire that might be around you. This is because carbon dioxide gas is heavier than air, and at high concentrations, it displaces oxygen. No oxygen means no combustion and no fire. But it also means you wouldn't be able to breathe. You would drop dead after a single gasp of air. This is exactly what happened in 1986 when a landslide or an earthquake triggered a limnic eruption on Lake Nyos. In total, 1,746 villagers and 3,500 livestock died instantly. No one was there to witness how its usually serene blue waters turned red from all the iron churned up from the bottom. Still up for a swim at the most dangerous lake on Earth? Well, the Lake Nyos disaster happened when the concentration of carbon dioxide in the lake was at its highest. And since 1986, some safety measures have been taken to avoid this happening again. Like a pipe at the bottom of the lake that now allows the gas to escape safely. Still, I wouldn't recommend risking your life for this experiment. Even with some of the gas being vented, Nyos has just way too much carbon dioxide.
This is the deepest hole mankind has ever dug. It's a straight drop into the bowels of the Earth. For 20 years, Russian scientists and engineers drilled deeper and deeper, hoping to uncover whatever mysteries the hole may hold, earning it the ominous nickname of the Well to Hell. What would happen if, for whatever reason, you fell into this hole? What would happen to your body? How deep would you fall? And what would you find at the bottom? This is What If, and here's what would happen if you fell into the deepest hole on Earth. So, you managed to take the plunge. You'll start plummeting at about 10 meters per second, and every second after that, it gets faster. If we take terminal velocity out of the mix and assume you weigh 80 kilograms, you'd eventually reach a speed of 490 meters per second. So, as you fall deeper and deeper, what would happen to your body? Falling at such high speed, you'll start to notice things getting a little toasty as your heart rate starts to elevate and panic sets in. You might find it getting a little harder to breathe. Why? Well, at 150 meters down, your poor lungs would be getting crushed by the constantly increasing air pressure. You might also encounter what cave explorers like to call foul air, deadly underground pockets of carbon dioxide. Great. Things can't get much worse, can they? Yeah, they can. Less than 3 kilometers into the trip, you're going to see your skin start to burn up. Literally. And as you continue to fall, it only gets hotter and hotter. This is because you're being pulled closer to the gravitational center of Earth and its molten core, which is baking the planet from the inside out. A temperature of 80 degrees can severely burn a person's skin in less than a second. At this point in the hole, you're feeling heat of over 180 degrees. On the bright side, you've probably already passed out. When you fall out of a plane, you can pass out from lack of air but wake up as oxygen becomes more available and catch a glimpse of the ground as you smack into it. Down here, you're not waking up. Okay, so things don't look good. But let's say you came prepared and wore an atmospheric diving suit to help with the increasing pressure as you fell. It's heavy, but it will help with that breathing problem. In 2016, Luke Akins jumped from over 7,600 meters without a parachute and survived without a scratch. Granted, he landed in a net, so if he's allowed to have one, you can too. Okay, so you land in the net. Great. Including your terminal velocity, you have successfully managed to free fall 12 kilometers straight down at a speed of 200 kilometers per hour. How long were you falling? Well, factoring in air resistance and terminal velocity, the whole trip took just over 3 minutes. And now, you've got to get back out. This is not going to be easy, but it may not be impossible. In 2018, Alex Honnold managed to scale Yosemite National Park's 914-meter-tall El Capitan granite wall without ropes in just 4 hours. Granted, he wasn't wearing a huge suit like you are. This big outfit wouldn't help you climb, and you would need some climbing equipment to help you get a better grip on the walls of the hole. But what's it like down there? To answer that, let's flash back to 1971 in the Kola Peninsula of northwest Russia, to be exact, when Russia began work on the Kola Super Deep Borehole. Measuring in at just over 12 kilometers deep, the Kola Super Deep Borehole is the deepest hole humankind has managed to dig on Earth. Team Kola had managed to break the world record for drilling depth, trying to get a leg up on the US during the Cold War. Eventually, though, they encountered temperatures of 180 degrees, which melted their equipment, so the hole was capped in 1992. When you're at the bottom, you'd find things are warm, to say the least. Not to mention, your body would be dealing with air pressure equal to 54 elephants perched on top of your head, weighing in at a whopping 378 tons. Talk about a headache. At least you could admire some of the 2.7 billion-year-old rocks down there. But really, could something like this, falling down this hole, ever happen? Who knows? To be honest, we're still trying to figure out the equipment requirements for digging this deep, let alone finding someone crazy enough to take the plunge. Luckily, the Kola Super Deep Borehole only has a diameter of 23 centimeters, so it's too narrow for you to trip into. And even with its record-breaking depth, the Kola Super Deep Borehole is only a fraction of the thickness of the Earth's crust. But it does make you think about what humans are capable of. Went to a party last night and I got stuck talking to a super borehole, but that's another story. The Kola Super Borehole has been sealed up, so you can no longer fall into it or drop things into it. But you'll get 2 more chances to fall into super boreholes soon because China is digging 2 more. One is going to be 10,500 meters deep. The other one's going to be 11,000 meters deep. Let's just hope that they also keep them to 23 centimeters so that my waist does not fit through there. Okay, our next story is kind of timely because a week or so ago, a former Air Force intelligence officer was testifying before Congress about UFOs, and he believes they exist, that the government knows about them, and that they're not telling you about it. Now, we've heard about UFOs before, they've been debated in Congress, but this is the first time a witness has ever been brought forth. Now, he didn't have any physical evidence, so we don't know what to believe, but if you want to try and find some physical evidence, why don't we all get together and storm Area 51? If you happened to wander into the Nevada desert and stumbled upon the secret U.S. military base, Area 51, you'd quickly be arrested, killed, or maybe even abducted by aliens. But what if you happened to organize 1 million other people through social media to storm Area 51? I mean, they can't stop us all, right? Or can they? And if you did manage to get into the base, what would you see? This is What If, and here's what would happen if 1 million people stormed Area 51. If you haven't heard of it before, Area 51 is a highly classified U.S. military base. It's heavily rumored to have secret military technology, and perhaps aliens. For decades, it's been the source of conspiracy theories, but now you want to see if any of those theories are true. How do you get to Area 51? It's off limits to visitors, so it may not be on your GPS. But there are online guides that you'll need to use. The closest airport is in Las Vegas. From there, you'll have to rent a car and drive through the southern Nevada desert for several hours. Keep in mind that there are going to be 1 million other people doing the same thing as you. If you think traffic in your city is bad, just wait till you see this. Nevada's most populated city, Las Vegas, has less than 800,000 people living in it. In fact, the entire state of Nevada only has about 3 million people. Adding another million people all at once would seriously damage Nevada's infrastructure. The roads to get to Area 51 aren't an 8-lane highway, Instead, they're small 2-lane roads and dirt trails. If 1 million people decided to do this, they may not even make it to the military base. Instead, they may get stuck in traffic or get into an accident. So much for seeing any aliens. But let's imagine that everyone somehow makes it to the front gates of the base. Now 1 million people are ready to storm Area 51. What happens next? Well, you and your friends are peaceful people, so you wouldn't be carrying any guns. You're just simply running into the base. As soon as you crossed the Area 51 borders, you'd quickly be met by the base's private security. These people, also known as camo dudes, have weapons in hand and patrol the base 24/7 in white pickup trucks. You wouldn't be able to sneak up on any of these guys, as they'd surely know you're coming. And it wouldn't just be the private security trying to stop you. With an event this big, the whole world would surely know, and it would be impossible to keep it a secret. Area 51 is a detachment of Edwards Air Force Base, which is located in Southern California. Thousands of active military members are stationed at Edwards. You could expect to see them, along with thousands of other armed soldiers and police members. They'd have their guns, tasers, tanks, and who knows what else. The armed forces would try to keep casualties at a minimum, but they'd still be hitting everyone with pepper spray and other non-lethal weapons. They'd still be determined to keep what's inside Area 51 a secret. So most likely, the camo dudes and their military counterparts would open fire on the crowds. And they're authorized to use deadly force, so don't be surprised if they started firing bullets. If you're lucky enough not to get shot or pepper sprayed, you'd get arrested. But what if you somehow managed to sneak past all the guards? Well, despite this, you still wouldn't be at the actual Area 51 base. At least not yet. You'd have to find it. That's because the original Area 51 base occupies a space of 150 square kilometers, but the property surrounding it is 1,600 square kilometers. It's reported that the base is discreet with blacked-out windows and hardly any visible lights from the outside. You could be walking around for hours before you found it. But once you reached Area 51, what would you see? Well, we're not really sure what's there, which is what makes this so exciting. Crazy military technology, UFOs, or even aliens could be lurking about. Proceed with caution though, as some suspect that the base is heavily polluted from decades of government experiments. If that's true, just being in the base without proper equipment could result in you getting sick or dying. So, storming Area 51 probably isn't a good idea. It would most likely result with you getting sick or arrested or dying. Sorry, you won't be getting a baby alien as a souvenir gift.
Whoa, watch your step. One little stumble and you could fall face first into a pit full of nightmares. Hundreds of angry rattlesnakes. How would they be able to see you? What would happen to your body if you were bitten by hundreds of snakes? And why would sucking the venom out not save your life? This is What If, and here's what would happen if you fell into a pit full of snakes. Rattlesnakes live in the forests, grasslands, and deserts of the United States and South America. You can identify them by their triangular head shape and, of course, their distinctive rattle. Running into even just one of these serpents in the wild would be enough to make you scream. And there's a good chance you'd find a lot more than one. Rattlesnakes often live together in dens or snake pits to avoid freezing and protect each other from predators. If you fell into one of these deadly pits rattling with venomous vipers, could you make it out alive? You picked the wrong day to fall into a hibernaculum. That's the official Latin name for the dens where snakes gather together. Depending on the snake pit and your luck, you could find yourself face to face with anywhere between 8 to 300 rattlesnakes. Winter is the most likely time you'd find hundreds of them congregating for warmth. If you happen to fall directly on top of these snakes, it would be only a matter of seconds before they'd attack. Yet, by some stroke of good fortune, you'd land in the den without immediately disturbing them. That's not to say that you'd be out of trouble, because these snakes would be on high alert. Their primary defense mechanism is to hide, and you just blocked the only exit. Rattling and hissing to scare you off, they'd use a couple of unique methods to hurt you. The rattlesnakes would know exactly where you are. During the day, these snakes can detect you by sampling the air with their tongue and tasting it with an organ near the roof of their mouth known as the Jacobson's organ. This organ tells a snake which direction higher concentrations of airborne molecules are coming from. At night, rattlesnakes use their pit to locate you. And no, I don't mean the hole you just fell into. I'm talking about a small hollow spot between a rattlesnake's eyes and nostrils. It's also called the pit. This area of the snake's head contains a membrane that can detect infrared radiation from your warm body. Just like in the Predator movies. All of these hundreds of snakes would be able to see you up to 1 meter away. Now the only question would be, how soon till they strike? Oops, I spoke too soon. The first one would sink its fangs into you, injecting its venom under your skin. Even if only one of the hundreds of snakes bites you, you'd be in trouble. Approximately 1 out of every 736 people who suffer from a rattlesnake bite dies. That means more people die from rattlesnake bites than any other snake bite. As more and more snakes began to attack you, they deliver more of their poisonous venom to your body. It only takes seconds for the venomous cocktail to travel from the fangs and into your tissues. But what is this deadly concoction? Rattlesnake venom is a complex mixture of different proteins, metals, and macromolecules that affect your organ systems. The venom coursing through your veins contains enzymes that lead to cell death, known as necrosis. At first, you'd experience some of the less severe symptoms, mild swelling, pain, and bruising, but you could also start to vomit or see your heart rate rise to more than 100 beats per minute. If more severe symptoms kicked in, you'd feel extreme pain, like being stabbed or burned by an explosion. Your airways would start to swell, cutting off your air supply, and you could slip into an altered mental state. But the worst would be yet to come. Your blood would become unable to clot, so you'd lose a ton of it, and your muscles would become weak, stiff, and would even start to break down entirely. This would make escaping the pit very difficult. You'd have to find all the strength you could muster to climb out of this snake pit. And now, you'd need to get some antivenom as fast as possible, ideally within 4 hours. Antivenom stops venom from binding to your tissues, which is what causes serious blood, tissue, and nervous system problems. The question would be, how much would you need after being bitten by so many snakes? One young girl in California who survived bites from 1 adult and 6 baby rattlesnakes required 4 doses of antivenom. You might need more than the hospital has in its inventory. And beware, trying to suck out the venom from your wounds or making a tourniquet wouldn't help you much in this case. Cutting off the blood flow would just lead to a higher venom concentration in one side of your body. The best thing to do would be to stay calm. Don't touch your wounds and, of course, get medical attention immediately.
Uh-oh. You just fell into a pool. With this thing. What is this? How would falling in here affect your health? And could you actually survive this? This is What If. And here's what would happen if you fell into a pool full of spent nuclear fuel rods. This is a spent nuclear fuel pool. and you've just accidentally fallen into it. But what exactly is this thing? This large pool of water is meant to cool spent fuel rods after they come out of a nuclear reactor. While powering a nuclear reactor, these fuel rods become very, very hot. We're talking 2,800 degrees. After it's spent 3 to 6 years inside of a nuclear reactor, a fuel rod is no longer efficient. Problem is, it still emits plenty of harmful radiation, and it will for the next 10,000 years. Even though it's trash, there's not a garbage dump in the world that will accept it. So, why is water a good place to put these things? Not only does the water spend several decades cooling the fuel rods, but it also affects their radiation. The water essentially acts as a biological shield, with hydrogen absorbing and deflecting the radiation bouncing against it. This makes it completely safe for you to stand near the pool with no ill effects. But what happens if you fall in the water? Well, as soon as you orient yourself, you'll quickly notice the temperature of the pool. This big tub of water won't be the refreshing dip you're looking for on a hot summer day. Instead, it'll be around 30 degrees. So, a bit colder than your average hot tub, but still very warm. Let's hope you didn't accidentally turn off the water flow as you're falling into the pool. If you did, then you'd be in some serious trouble. Spent nuclear fuel pools are constantly cycling out water in order to keep it at a cool enough temperature. Remember, these fuel rods are incredibly hot, and if the water isn't cycled out, then it would heat up significantly and slowly evaporate over time, resulting in you burning to a crisp. But that didn't happen. So now that you're starting to swim in this hot pool of water, when does the horrible radiation poisoning kick in? Or when do you turn green and start to gain superpowers? These are the sort of things that are supposed to happen when you fall into something that has nuclear fuel in it, right? Not exactly. Although that sounds like fun, it wouldn't happen to you if you fell into a spent nuclear fuel pool. That's because of the water. Not only does it protect the people outside of the pool, it'll also protect you if you happen to fall inside one. As long as you don't swim several meters underwater to touch the fuel rods, you'd be completely fine. Yeah, in theory, you could swim in this pool until you looked like a raisin without feeling any negative effects. Although they're protecting something incredibly dangerous, spent nuclear fuel pools are quite serene and kind of boring. In fact, this might be a lot cleaner and safer than your average public pool. You won't find any germs or children peeing in the water here. And swimming in this pool would expose you to less radiation than you experience in your everyday life. We encounter radiation in medical procedures such as X-rays and CT scans, from certain fuels like gas or coal. Even our televisions and other screens give off tiny traces of radiation. Swimming in here isn't any more dangerous than watching a what-if video. If splashing around in a spent nuclear fuel pool is a little too boring for you, how about swimming on one of Saturn's moons? Well, that sounds like a story for another What If. Hey, thanks for joining us on this marathon today. We really appreciate the fact that you stuck it out right till the very end. Now, we're going to try and bring you one of these every week, so if you want to be notified of when they're going to happen, or maybe you just want to see when the next single What If video drops, well, hit like and subscribe and you'll get a notification as to when they're going to happen. In the meantime, if you're not done with us, well, we've got about 1,000 other videos on this site, so take a look around. I'll